This is the kind of drawing that you get. This was actually put up at a lecture the other day at Lloyd's of London by a supposedly serious scientist. He was the professor of climate change at University College London. Climate change impacts, that was he was professor of. And one climate change impact that he wanted to illustrate was what it would look like in London if Al Gore's 20-foot sea level rise actually happened. And as you can see, the Houses of Parliament would pretty much disappear. To which my saying is, and your problem is? I think most people, frankly, would like to see the back of us parliamentarians, so bring on that global warming. Now, another very important preliminary point that I want to make here. A horse goes into a bar, and the barman says, "Why the long face?" "Because it's a horse, you idiot." A lot of the points I'm going to be making to you today will be just as blindingly obvious and simple as that. Because what has happened in this debate is that everything which is straightforward and obvious has been laughed at by the faction that has been peddling this scare to try to make it look as though it isn't obvious. And everything that is, in fact, complex and nonsensical, they try to say, that's obvious. So we're going to turn it round the other way and just make everything hopelessly complex. No, that's not right. To try and make everything clear and simple and straightforward. I will be making simple, straightforward points to you that any layman will be able to understand with the perfect ease. Why? Because I am not a climate scientist, and if it were complicated, I wouldn't understand it. So another final, very important preliminary point. Do not believe a word I say. Science is not a belief system. It is not a way of simply thinking you like somebody because he tells a good joke or he makes a good speech or he has a nice fancy title or he's a whinging pom that's got the ashes. And we've got the ashes, so there. At this point, Alan, I think I'm beginning to lose the audience, so I'll move on. So the point is, science is not a belief system. Everything I say is easily, independently verifiable. And if, after I've said it, you think it's a crock of whatever word you like to think, then just ask me, call me out on it, and I will do my best to flannel round an answer in the best politician's fashion. Now, why does the truth matter? I'm going to report to you a conversation illustrated here by Tintoretto. Now, this conversation took place about 2,000 years ago between the two gentlemen you see there, the one standing in the white robe and the one sitting in the purple robe. And what I'm going to do is to give you this conversation in the language in which it was almost certainly spoken, which is Latin. Quaesivit enim Pilatus, quid est veritas? Atque ita dixit iste gubernator Judaeae, quia dixerat ille salvator mundi, ego in hoc natus sum, et ad hoc veni in mundum, ut testimonium per hibeam veritati. Unto this was I born, for this came I into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. That was the manifesto of the Lord of Life himself. That ought to be the manifesto of any honest policymaker, of any honest scientific enquirer, and of any honest journalist. It is the truth alone that is worthy of our entire devotion. And this is a very ancient idea in science in particular. The man who is credited with developing the scientific method as we know it today, as a method of a disciplined approach to finding out truth in science, was the gentleman you see on the Iraqi banknote here, Abu Ali ibn al-Hassan ibn al-Hussein ibn al-Hussein ibn al-Haytham. And they rather liked their ancestors to be named in their title just as we do. And he was a very distinguished mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher of science in 11th century Iraq. And he said, the seeker after truth, that was his word for a scientist, the seeker after truth does not put his faith in any old consensus, however broad, however fashionable, however venerable. Instead, he subjects what he has learnt of it to his hard-won scientific knowledge and to measurement, to verification and checking and checking and checking again. The road to the truth, said Al-Haytham, is long and hard, but that is the road we must follow. Now I want to show you why it matters that we should follow that road with great care. Because about 40 years ago, DDT was banned worldwide, pretty much. Before the DDT ban, according to a couple of scientific papers that I can give you notice of if you need them, something like 50,000 people a year were being killed of malaria because DDT had more or less eradicated it in most places. Then it was banned. And even in the countries where it wasn't banned, they couldn't get it because they were previously getting it from the countries where it was banned. Result, after the DDT ban, the deaths from malaria rose to more than 1 million a year, where they stayed for 40 years, until Dr. Arata Kochi of the World Health Organization lifted the ban. And he said this, quite often in this field, politics comes first and science second. We must take a position based on the science and the data, and he lifted the ban. And to this day, I am vilified in certain quarters for even saying that there was a ban. They tried to pretend that there wasn't one, or it wasn't worldwide, or it wasn't imposed by the WHO, or nobody paid any attention to it, or they could have got DDT and used it if they wanted. In fact, there was a ban. Result, deaths of 40 million children, because it's mostly children that die of malaria. And why? Because DDT, which is pretty much entirely harmless to anything except mosquitoes, was banned not only in agriculture, where there was a case for banning it, but also for interior spraying of houses, where it could have done no harm to the wildlife outside. That carelessness of the global scientific community led to the deaths of tens of millions of children. So it matters to get these things right. Here is another example, HIV. When this first appeared, it was a new, fatal infection. Nobody knew how to cure it, and they still don't. Now, what should happen, the standard public health measure when this happens, is that you immediately isolate all carriers so that they can't spread it to anybody else. That's what should have been done. Everybody knew is what it should have been done, but the pressure groups were at it straight away, and it wasn't done, and the result is the hideous figures you see there, 25 million dead and counting, 40 million infected and counting. Now we've just got to get used to it because it's long past the epidemic threshold, long past the point where we could now prevent it by public health measures of that kind. Because what was admittedly a difficult and painful decision wasn't taken when it should have been. 25 million unnecessary, agonizing deaths, 40 million sentenced to death. Here is one of them. This lady, when this photograph was taken, had already lost 2 sons to HIV, which they had contracted from her in the womb. Her third son died a month after this photograph was taken, and she herself died a year later. That is what happens, ladies and gentlemen, if instead of doing the science, you do politics. And I am putting to you a very important proposition, which is that we are going to do science here tonight, and we're not going to do politics. And so if you thought I was going to start castigating your government, I'm not. If I do castigate anyone, I'm going to castigate the entire political class for allowing this global warming nonsense, for that is what it is, to spread as far as it has. Here is what has happened as a result of the global warming nonsense. This is even before the tragic earthquake in Haiti. Here you see a man starving, trying to make a living by making mud pies with real mud for his neighbors. This is what they lived on in Haiti even before the earthquake. I told this story once in Madrid just recently at a conference of government and opposition leaders and civil servants. And one of them in the front burst into tears. And she said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be upset, because I've just come back from Haiti. And now, because of the doubling of world food prices, caused by the biofuel scam, taking all that agricultural